I only remember one question from when I applied here at Sage Hill, and it was, what are you going to do for the Sage Hill community? I remember immediately responding that I would build them a nationally recognized debate team. 3 years later, I look back on that question, and it's hard to believe how much that one choice has changed my life and fundamentally changed how I view competition. My 180 today was that high-quality competition is not, in fact, a burden to success, but is something that should be fostered. And the best way to foster it is by looking at the healthy competitive environments that underlie them. But before we get into understanding what this 180 means or what its applications are, we have to understand a little bit of where it came from. Part one of my story. I started debating in grade 7. My science teacher at the time, who also happened to be the head coach of debate at my school, pushed me very heavily to join the debate team, and I immediately fell in love. I spent hours upon hours upon hours on debate. I would sit in class researching any topic I could, trying to find any debate I could, doing anything I could to get better. I stopped doing homework, I stopped paying attention, my teachers loved it. But I got pretty good at debate. Those hours paid off, and over time, I started winning more and more tournaments. I started doing better and better and making a name for myself in the Canadian debate scene. But I stayed grounded because of 2 senior high students, grade 12ers, for those Americans out there, who pushed me to always better myself, to always try to find better competition, to learn new things and try new strategies. And one day, they approached me after one of our debate sessions and asked me to work with the senior high club. Now, this hadn't been done. And as a grade 7 kid trying to move into a team of grade 10, 11, and 12 kids, it was daunting. I knew that I was probably going to lose consistently for the next year and a half. But for some reason, I decided to do it, and I became better because of it. I started to win more again. I started to get better at a faster rate. And the lesson I took away from it is that good competitive environments create strong competitors that also want to mentor other competitors and make them just as good. But all of that changed. All of that learning went out the window when I moved to the United States of America. Now, I was excited, don't get me wrong, because freedom of speech, debate, and discourse are boiled into the virtues and the values of the United States, of the American dream. For example, you guys had a vice president that said freedom is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, dissent, and debate. So for a kid that loved debate, this is a pretty good sign. But what I experienced in the American debate community was very different. I underwent starting to construct this team, and in the process, I ended up talking to a lot of coaches, tournament organizers, judges, and most importantly, debaters. And what I realized was that for some reason in the American competitive system, the best debaters weren't winning. For some reason, time and time again, the same schools kept winning tournaments, even though they weren't necessarily the best debaters. And I couldn't put my finger on why this was happening at the time, but I knew something was awry. Something wasn't going right. The lesson I took away from this is that some environments can turn into unhealthy competition. And when that happens, we start to see artificial success and a lack of thought about what the environment actually looks like. So, part 2 of this story is what I did to change that. I founded a company called Debate Meta. But before we get into what Debate Meta does, we have to talk about what specifically made American debate have these issues. I sat down one day on a Saturday morning after a tournament, and I started to ask myself, why aren't the best debaters winning? What are the 6 main reasons? And here they are. The first one is that the American debate community had become impact blind. We no longer were thinking about what the repercussions were of the strategies we were using or the rules we were putting in place. We were just putting them in place because they sounded good or they gave us more success. But that had negative outcomes. We weren't considering how the decisions we made about this environment affected other environments. For example, the education that students were getting out of debate, the ability of other individuals to access debate. The second major issue was dog whistles. There were certain phrases, strategies, words that you could toss in your speech to indicate to the judge that you were an insider, that you knew what you were doing, that you were an experienced debater. And this oftentimes led to a win, even if you didn't deserve to win the round. Now, I'm not saying that the judges were corrupt. In fact, I'm saying exactly the opposite. But by putting up a veneer of understanding, a veneer of success, the judges then started to rationalize and build reasons for themselves why that debater probably won, even if they didn't. The third issue was restrictions. The American Debate Group that overarches everything, NSDA, decided that they were only going to focus on American-made formats. Now, this is abnormal. There's no other country in the world that only practices debate formats that are made by them. To be clear, there are lots of different debate formats. You can vary the number of speakers, the speaking times, the types of topics that come up. But America is kind of pushed away from the international community and decided to use their own. But this restricted them a lot and stopped them from competing on an international scale effectively. The fourth issue is regulation. NSDA decided who was able to compete, who was able to run tournaments, where tournaments were able to be held, and who was going to be eligible for national competitions, etc. The fifth issue was infrastructure. How we recorded who won the debates, how we decided where topics were going to be released, how we voted on topics, all was outdated and built internally. But the bigger issue was there was no open sourcing on it or clarity. No one could build products or tools on top of this infrastructure to make debaters better. And the final issue, and probably the biggest issue, was data monopolization. You see, 4 big schools tend to have massive coaching staffs. We're talking with more than 30 coaches working with the debate team at any time. And that sounds insane because it is. 30 coaches is a lot of money, especially when most schools in America don't even have one. But at the same time that these schools had massive coaching staffs, they also were the same schools that indirectly owned the websites where everybody published their cases, where everybody discussed their rounds and discussed their topics. And so when you combined this massive amount of manpower that these individuals had with this unprecedented access to data, they were able to beat kids before they even walked into the room. It would be like if the Lakers-Golden State game was decided before we even had a tip-off. So I decided to do something. I founded my company called Debate Meta, and the entire premise of it was to give everyone access to this data by using technology and automation to be able to scan through all of these data files and websites that have been put up and condense that information into something usable by an individual. And we did this in 3 ways. We started by using the pre-existing infrastructure. As hard as it was to build on top of it, we decided that that was the only way that was going to work because NSDA was in no position to change that infrastructure anytime soon. And once we did that, we started creating clarity about competition. Which topics were doing well? Which debaters were doing well? What's your win percentage over time? Are judges voting equally on topics? And finally, we started to support healthy environments by sponsoring tournaments. But the main takeaway here is that the bad decisions, the issues we talked about, weren't made by people with bad intentions. Remember, when growing the team here at Sage, I had talked to all these judges, all of these tournament organizers, all these coaches, and none of them had bad intentions. They all wanted to see what was best for their kids, for their debaters. As the ancient Chinese proverb says, well, the road to hell is oftentimes paved with good intentions. And that's what was happening here. But the question, once we realize that these decisions is going to be made, isn't, well, how do we prevent them? But it becomes, how do we remedy them once they are made? And that's what I decided to do here. But let's take this out of the window of debate. What does this mean for the real world, and how does this tie back to my 180 about competition, and more specifically, healthy competitive environments? Well, I'd argue that healthy competitive environments are the most fundamental part of the society we live in. Now, we see a lot of different articles about this pretty much everywhere, right? Forbes has an article about it, Inc. has an article about it, Entrepreneurship has an article about it, where they just give you a laundry list of reasons why competition is good. They'll tell you it's good for drawing more attention to the industry, it's good for innovation, it's good because it increases customer experiences, but we're missing 2 critical questions. One, what actually is a healthy competitive environment? And secondly, how do we build one? What does it look like? So to answer that first question, I think there are 3 things that define a competitive environment. They're everywhere, they're extremely important, and we don't talk about them. Within a free society, every single action, every single thing we do is defined by a competitive environment. Who gets tertiary education? Who gets what jobs? Who's able to get concert tickets? Who gets elected to government? All of these things are divided or decided by a competitive system. But none of us talk about them. No one thinks about the ticket buying process for the new Travis Scott concert as a competitive environment, or public versus private as a competitive environment, but they are. And the reason that it's an issue that we're not having discussions about it is that we all have a vested interest in it. My revelation came when I realized that these competitive environments aren't arbitrary. They're the cumulative product of every involved actor's conscious and unconscious choices in relation to said environment. In practical terms, every time we decide to support a ticket seller that also supports scalping, we're ingraining that competitive environment and supporting it. Every time we decide to send a child to public versus private, we're changing that competitive environment. Every time someone makes a choice to go to university instead of going directly to the job force, we're changing that competitive environment. So why should we care? Why does it matter whether our competitive environments are healthy or not? Well, I think there are fundamentally two reasons. One is that it's just ethically or morally the right thing to do. Everyone should have equal access to the same competitive environments, even if they're not likely to win. I'm not saying that we have to allow everyone to win an NBA championship, but I'm saying that everybody should be eligible to try. And that's the real issue. But the second reason, if you don't buy that it's ethically or morally correct, is that we need to. There are lots of countries all around us that are focusing on their competitive environments, that are thinking about how to refine them, how to make them better, how to make them more accessible, because they've seen the benefits that we have. And if we don't decide to do the same, we're going to get passed very quickly. Countries like China, countries like India, where there is a huge focus on optimizing these environments and an even faster ability to do so. But irregardless of why you think it's important to have these healthy competitive environments, the same question arises. What do they look like? How can we build healthy competitive environments? Well, as John F. Kennedy says, a rising tide lifts all boats. It starts with building an even playing field. So let's talk about the 5 things that define a healthy competitive environment. The first is that it's impact aware. If you contrast this to the debate environment, unlike that environment, whenever we make a decision about one of these systems, we should be thinking about the greater ramifications of this. How does this impact me as an individual right now? How does this impact the same person that's going to be in my shoes 10 years down the road? How does it impact the people that are going to be changed by my decision to some regard? And how does it impact the competitive environment itself? Those are all questions we should ask ourselves and ask each other before making decisions about things, whether it's a policy decision or a new social norm we're trying to implement. But the second thing is free entry. We should reduce the arbitrary barriers to entry for a lot of firms, for a lot of industries, and for a lot of things in general. Now, I'm not saying that, for example, we need to give everybody the ability to have a funded startup and to go through all that. But I'm saying that if there are arbitrary barriers such as race, gender, social norms that are pushing someone out of feeling comfortable doing something, we should do our best to try to minimize those. Because the more people we have working at something, the greater chance there is that something great happens. It's a numbers game. The third thing is innovation. Too often, I think, in our world today, we over-fear technology and over-regulate it before we even have a chance to create an innovative product. At the end of the day, it's hard for us to regulate something we don't understand and hasn't yet been developed, but we still try to do it. And that's a huge issue because this innovation is what spurs the ability to create new products, new ideas, and better systems. So we have to make sure we're not regulating it before it happens. The fourth issue is independence. We have to crush out artificial alliances, collusion, monopolies whenever possible, because even playing fields only work when every individual is motivated by their best interests and by the best interests of that environment, not if there's some sort of ulterior motive. If there's a benefit for individuals to work together against everybody else, that'll tend to deteriorate the environment itself. And the fifth and most important issue is that we have a consistent data set. Now, what does this mean? I think that we can all agree that to some degree there are discussions about how to create better environments already happening. But more importantly, we have to have discussions about how to measure those changes. It seems pretty straightforward for things like business. We can look at profitability. If we're looking at the national economic growth, we can look at GDP. But how do we measure the success of an education system? Is it by the number of people that graduate? Standardized test scores? The tertiary education rate after graduation from that system, the employment rate after graduation from that system, there's no consensus, but there's even less discussion. We have to decide on metrics. Which brings us to the critical question. What can we all do? What are our individual choices that we can make that will affect these systems? Well, I think that we all are in a great opportunity. And Bill Gates said it best, we're changing the world with technology. All of us in our pockets right now have more opportunity and more of an ability to change the world than the entire human race that came before us combined. Each of us individually sitting in our pockets. And yet, so few of us take advantage of it. We now have almost unlimited and free access to opportunities anywhere at any time. We have easy access to fields and experts. I can learn pretty much anything I want from anybody I want in the world, and everyone has the opportunity to create discourse, whether it's on social media or somewhere else. These are things that are innate to everyone now, that the internet and technology has created. The net of this is that technology allows us to approach issues within competitive environments from a new angle. So here are 3 things that I think all of us can do. All of us can walk out of here today doing and practicing and working on that will immediately have an effect. The first one is release content constantly. What does that mean? It doesn't matter whether you're an accountant or a candle maker. Your expertise matters in your field, and your voice matters. All of our voices matter. If you have an issue with accounting or with candle making, go on LinkedIn, go on Twitter, put something out about it, talk about the issues you see, talk about possible solutions you have. This isn't the time to be silent about issues that we see in the world. It's time to talk about them. Because I guarantee you, if you're a candle maker and you find that there's a consistent issue within that, you're not the only one that's doing it. It's time to start creating discourse about issues because it's the first step to solving them. But the second thing you can do is develop projects and products. If you see an issue and you want to change it and you have an idea and you're like, this could work, do it. I'm a 17-year-old who made my own company to solve an issue in an environment I was passionate about. Everyone in this room can do it. Entrepreneurship has never been more accessible than it has been today. But thirdly, and I think this is both the easiest and the most important one, we all have to agree and hold each other accountable to audit long-term systems. What I mean by this is if there's something that we're doing continuously because we've always done it that way, or it just works to do it that way, let's all agree to take a step back and reconsider whether it's efficient, whether it actually works, whether it works as good as it can, and then audit it. This is the key, because a lot of things nowadays work, but they don't work as well as they could. And if we get caught in the trap of complacency, we risk not advancing any further as individuals and as a country and as humans in general. This is the one that every single one of us can do, starting today, that will have the biggest impact overall. Every individual in this audience today has something that matters, has something they can do to impact an environment around them and make it better. All of us are in a unique position to create change, even if it's just by creating more discourse surrounding their field or passion. At the end of the day, we all have a role to play in making society better. Thank you.